This is Between the Brackets, a Mediawiki podcast, episode 26, January 22nd, 2019. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren. And my guest for this episode is Megan Cutrofello, otherwise known as River. She runs the League of Legends esports wiki, also known as Leaguepedia. And let me tell you that whether you think of video games as important, frivolous, or something in between, the technical aspects of this wiki are about as serious as it gets. Megan is the manager of Leaguepedia and other esports wikis at a company and website called Gamepedia, which is a wiki farm for wikis about video games. She has been involved with esports wikis since 2014 and has been at Gamepedia since 2017. She was also named Unsung Hero of the Year at the 2017 Esports Industry Awards, which is pretty amazing. And hopefully after this podcast, she'll be a little less unsung. So, Megan, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Before we get into what you're doing with the wiki, I want to give people some context. I'm guessing some of the people listening don't realize just how massive the video game and esports industries are right now. Actually, I'm not sure I fully understand it either. I mean, I play chess online and on my phone, but that's about the extent of my gaming activity. Do you happen to know any statistics offhand for how big this whole thing is?
So there's numbers for how many people play the game and then how many people watch the game, and it's so I'll talk specifically about League of Legends, but when I say League of Legends numbers, that's the biggest esport, but there's tons and tons of video games that have been that have esports communities in addition to just casual play. And just to say at the start, esports is people playing video games competitively, professionally. This is their full-time job, as if you were a basketball or baseball player. They're video game athletes. So the past World Finals, every year there's a World Championship. It was watched by 99.6 million unique viewers.
Wow.
And the World Championship is a month-long event, so this is just for the finals. And in 2017, so this is a year ago, League of Legends esports was watched by over 80 million people. So you have this huge growth. And the most recent statistic that I have available that I just looked up on Wikipedia is from January 2014. Over 67 million people played per month. So there's a lot of people who are very interested.
Yeah. I think the major sporting events in the U.S. for football, baseball, and so forth, like the Super Bowl and so forth, get around 100 million people watching them. So it's really not that far off. It's interesting. There have been news reports about people wanting to get esports into the Olympics, which kind of seems absurd on the face of it. But after you hear numbers like that, it starts to sound a lot less crazy.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about esports is that it's really a global thing. And obviously, a lot of sports are global too, but esports. There are technical aspects where you ping matters a lot. So if you're physically located far away from the server, it can matter a huge amount. So you don't typically see people in Europe playing with people in Korea because the ping really does make a difference. But if you're playing casually, it doesn't really matter where you live, and so there's a huge global audience for a lot of titles.
Yeah. So are there certain countries where esports is a bigger deal than others?
Yeah, so South Korea. Basically, esports is huge in South Korea, and with StarCraft in particular, that was sort of like the pioneer for esports becoming a huge thing. Different games tend to be popular in different countries. Call of Duty is more popular here. League of Legends is Korea historically has been the strongest country at League of Legends, but actually it was a Chinese team that won this past World Championship. And Europe has also started to look a lot better.
Yeah, okay. So if one of, say, the top League of Legends players walk down the street in Seoul or whatever, is there a chance that they would get recognized?
Yeah, definitely. That would be Faker, by the way.
Oh, okay. He's
the best. Well, he's historically the best, yeah.
He's like the LeBron James. He's like the celebrity of the sports.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. So there are these tournaments, and you can go in person also to watch these people compete?
Yeah. So when I lived in LA, I used to go to a bunch of events. And also before I worked on the wiki so that I didn't have to work during the events. So I used to attend a bunch in person, and it's a really cool experience because you can meet the players. And it's just the energy of the crowd is insane. And there's esports specific venues that are being constructed more and more now. Usually most events are going to be most of the really big events are going to be in a sports stadium that has a special stage constructed for the event specifically. But yeah, a lot of people really enjoy going in person.
Yeah. What's it like? Is it sort of like a baseball game or like a boxing match or like a sci-fi convention or what?
It's a combination of things. In the past, there were tournaments that were held at events like PAX. So then it's literally, there's a convention plus the event or like the esports event will be held there. But yeah, there's like giant TV screens the players are playing on stage. For the World Championship, they did a huge pre-show that was really impressive. They debuted a K-pop single in conjunction with the event, and they had a live augmented reality performance of it before the game started. So it was crazy.
Yeah. How many tournaments are there like this? Throughout the world? In a year? Would you say?
I think tournament is the wrong word for League of Legends specifically. There's definitely regular seasons, playoffs. So the typical split of the top leagues will be in winter to spring, there's a spring season, and then in summer, there's a summer season. And if you're in the southern hemisphere, that's named opposite. And then after that, there's a world championship. And then in the break between the two splits, there's a mid-season invitational. So it's very much like there's seasons and then there's international competitions. Most other games so I guess Overwatch is the other game that has specifically well-defined seasons like that. But a lot of games will still have more individual tournaments. So Dota is probably the best example of that, where there's like major events throughout the year, and then it's up to third-party organizers for the most part to host events, and then the company that overall runs Dota will do their own tournament as well.
Yeah.
So I guess the structure kind of varies, but for League of Legends specifically, instead of just being a bunch of individual tournaments, it much more mimics the traditional sports ideas of having seasons and playoffs.
Yeah, okay. That's really interesting. So how did you decide to get involved in esports?
I played a lot of video games in college, and I liked it more than most of the other things that I was doing. And but it wasn't just that I enjoyed video games. I also really enjoyed like contributing to communities and stuff.
Right.
So it was a combination of like I want to do something different from what I'm doing right now, and also I really love video games. And so when I was in college, League of Legends was like just starting to pick up as a thing. And so I knew like this is something where there's going to be jobs, and I totally love this. So let's see if I can work in this. And initially I wanted to like be a tournament organizer or community manager or something like that. And I just ended up here somehow.
Right. So you run the League of Legends esports wiki, which is available for anyone who wants to see it at lol.gamepedia.com. What kinds of information does the wiki hold?
So we do a bunch of stuff. I would say the things that people are the most interested in depend on what time of year it is. So during the season, we do results of games that are happening. so you can see current standings. And I guess I should preface this by saying that even though most of these things are run by Riot, there's not a great official way to track all of the data about every single league in a single location.
Yeah, okay. And Riot are the developers of League of Legends?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, yeah.
So they run most of the tournaments. There's also a bunch of other third-party events. So, and because of the history of it not really starting out as a single consolidated thing, there's always been this need in the community to have a single place where you can find all of the current information.
Right.
So the wiki sort of grew really organically, and so we'll have current standings, rosters, results of games. We do some stats about the games. We don't go super in depth into stats, but we have like basic stuff that you might want to see at a glance. Without going like too much into detail about the game, we have some other information about the games that people may want to see. So a lot of sort of quantitative stuff during the season. We also have databases on players and teams, and we do roster transfers, like player histories of what teams they were on, team histories of what players were on that team, results, achievements. We also do stuff like there's a bunch of League of Legends talk shows and podcasts and stuff, so we track episodes of those that people can look up. If players are penalized, we have a database of competitive rulings. So basically pretty much anything.
Yeah. It's interesting because with professional sports, there's a whole massive infrastructure in place there of journalists, authors, commentators, TV shows, magazines, all that stuff, to report on the scores and on the people involved, etc. But for esports, which have a comparable amount of interest, there seems to be a much smaller number of sources that provide information on it, and maybe all of them are online. I mean, you mentioned podcasts and so forth, but it's all online stuff. And I guess for certain types of information, maybe your wiki is really the only source for that information.
So I think I would say for any individual single piece of information, it's pretty unlikely that we're the single only place that you can find that, but we're definitely the only place where you can easily know that you're going to get everything that you're looking for.
Yeah. So how much traffic does Leaguepedia get? Do you know? Can you tell me?
I do know, but I don't think I can tell you.
Okay. Yeah. I'd have to imagine it's substantial, given, as I said, that there's a much more limited set of sources for presumably a similar amount of demand as the baseball and the rest. But that's just my speculation. So before we get any further, Gamepedia has had an interesting history. You've had a lot of different corporate owners. What's a brief history of Gamepedia?
Well, so just to clarify, Gamepedia has always been under Curse. And then Curse was bought out by Twitch a couple years ago, and Twitch is the largest streaming platform, which means that people will watch live streams there. A live stream is kind of like a television channel that anyone can broadcast, and it's located at a URL instead of being located at a channel because it's all online. So Gamepedia was under Twitch for a couple years, and recently was bought out by Fandom, which is the company that owns Wikia. So we're there now. And I've been involved in a couple different wikis. Like you said, I started doing this in 2014 at a different site, and then we moved one other time, and then back to Gamepedia in November 2017.
Yeah, okay. So you got involved with, I guess, the first iteration of Leaguepedia back in 2014. What did it look like at that point before you joined? So when I joined, I had no interest in wikis at all.
I still wanted to be a content creator or a community manager or something. And I saw a tweet that they had that they were looking for people to help out with their social media. So I was like, all right, cool, I'll do that. So they were a lot more varied in what they did than we are now. So they had, they put out articles and had some like journalism stuff, and a lot of social media. They put out like regular infographics and stuff. But the wiki wasn't, I guess, as much of a focus. So it was more like we do a lot of stuff on a wiki, and now we're like, yeah, we just do a wiki.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I wanted to ask about that. I mean, were you? How did that process go? That collectively it was decided that the wiki is the most important thing. Were you involved in that decision, or did it just seem obvious like that was where the real demand was?
I think that also happened organically, for the most part. There was a lot of transitioning happening, and it was just kind of like, is this really something that we should put resources into?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how did it feel to, like, get into wiki stuff? I mean, that's a big question, I guess, but
Yeah.
Did you realize, was there a moment when you realized, like, okay, I'm a wiki developer now?
So I'll start at the very beginning. Like I said, I was doing social media, and I remember there was one time some player asked for us to change something on the page, and literally all I had to do was like edit one text field in some template, and I was just like, I do not want to do this. Someone else do this for me. I don't want to touch this, because I know if I do, I'm just going to get sucked down some ridiculous rabbit hole. And the next thing I know, I'm just going to be doing nothing except for this, and I'm going to learn so many things, and that's just not what I want to do. And that was a pretty good prediction. Except for the part where I thought it wasn't what I wanted to do. I was wrong about that.
That's really cool. So I guess maybe the same thing could be said for on the wiki getting involved in programming. Actually, there's a chapter in my book called Mediawiki Development: A Guide for the Accidental Developer, which sort of
that's pretty much me.
Yeah, it seems to sum up your experience. That now you're doing all this scripting and so forth on the wiki. How has that experience been?
It's definitely been a journey. So I guess I probably made my first edit in about August 2014 after joining in January. And then I was mostly just doing some basic, like, text editing, really, on the wiki. And I was really good at Excel. And I didn't know anything about Mediawiki. And no one really told me anything about Mediawiki. So I didn't really know about templates. So what I was doing to make markup happen was that I knew, like, what I had to display. And so I would write code in Excel so that I could type into Excel and then generate the written out wiki markup and then paste that into Mediawiki instead of just writing a really basic template, because I didn't know that templates existed.
Right.
So that's where I was in August 2014. And then I sort of started to learn, okay, templates exist. These are some things I can do with them. I didn't know anything about CSS. I learned about semantic Mediawiki, and we were using a ton of SMW back then, and I guess we still are, unfortunately. But so I was like, all right, this seems like a really cool thing. What can I do with this? And we had a developer, and so I started talking to him about like what SMW can do, and I was like, oh, we could make match histories of all of the games that a player has played in, sorted most recent to oldest. That seems like the coolest thing ever. Why aren't we doing this? So I started to see like, okay, here's a bunch of things we can do, but I was still just like writing very basic code. I hesitate to call it code in Mediawiki templates, just using parser functions.
Right.
And then when we moved, so this was probably 2014 to 2017, I started just doing more and more of this. And pretty much it was all still just making wiki tables and putting information into it, and a lot of SMW. And then in 2017, when we moved to Gamepedia, well, I guess I'll say also, when I went to SMWCon in 2015, I think,
Sure, yeah.
I heard about Lua and Cargo, and I was like, oh, this seems really cool, but probably way over my head, but really cool, but maybe something to think about in the future. And so when we went back to Gamepedia in 2017, I was like, all right, I want to do this. And so I wrote my first module in, I want to say January last year, maybe February. And oh wow, it was so bad. It's still live on the wiki, and it's not good. And it took me a couple of days to do, because I had I took an intro Python class in college, and that's basically it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so since then I pretty quickly I've started doing a ton of development, and now I do a ton of Cargo, Lua. I've done a bunch of JavaScript to enhance whatever the Lua and Cargo is doing, and I write Python code to do external edits to apply to the wiki, and I have like a daily maintenance script that does a bunch of different tasks that runs and fixes common errors and stuff. So yeah, at this point, I basically just consider myself a Mediawiki developer who also manages the wiki that I develop for.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's really interesting. I definitely wanted to talk about Cargo and Lua. I guess it's kind of a running joke on this podcast that I basically bring up the Cargo extension on every episode. But in this case, you brought it up, thankfully. And it is quite relevant.
I can talk about page forms too.
Okay, yeah, we can talk about page forms. These are the Cargo and page forms are extensions that I'm the main author of. For anyone who's curious. We can talk about page forms. I'm quite a bit more interested in Cargo because as I understand it, a big part of your job so far has been transferring the wiki over from using Semantic Mediawiki to Cargo.
Yeah.
What was the reasoning behind that switch?
So Gamepedia wants to get rid of SMW completely, for performance reasons. But also SMW is just way less robust than Cargo. I want to be able to have a bunch of tables and join on them. And given what we do, Cargo just makes a lot more sense than SMW. So a lot of stuff that I do now, I mean, I guess technically it would be possible in SMW, but it just seems like it would be so much more painful.
Yeah. Do you happen to know any statistics about like the performance benefits, the performance, what's the word? Advantage of Cargo? Okay.
I have no idea. Sorry.
Yeah, but SMW was leading to site slowdowns or crashes.
Yeah. So one wiki. So not my wiki, but the Path of Exile wiki took down all of Gamepedia for a couple hours once because of their SMW. So SMW was cut off there, and they're completely on Cargo now. From one point of view, we're like 90% on Cargo, and from another view, we're like 50% on Cargo because there's only one. It's not a table because it's SMW, but there's only like one set of stuff left that I have to change over, but it's also by far the biggest.
Yeah, so sometimes people ask me about, how difficult is it to switch over from SMW to Cargo or to use both, that kind of thing. Usually when people ask, I tell them it'll take a few hours to do.
That's gonna depend a lot on how in depth you're already using it.
Yeah, it sure will. Yeah, I know it. Yeah, I figured you'd find that funny. Yeah, I mean that's based on the assumption that there may be 5 or so Infobox templates on their wiki, something like that. in your case, the process has taken what, a year or longer?
So I was actually mostly done with this in June, I think. So probably only about half a year.
Oh, okay.
Again, with the caveat that our per game scoreboard data is still in SMW.
Yeah. Can you give people some context for that? I mean, how many templates are there on the site? How many queries, etc.?
I have no idea.
I think your pause maybe says it all.
Yeah. So let me go to template namespace. So some of the numbers are going to be a little bit inflated because we have some templates that are like halfway between content and code, where it'll be like we have static tabs at the top of pages, and so that'll be like one template per group of tabs.
Yeah,
but
okay, sure, but fine. But every template adds a certain amount of complexity in any case.
So the first, so if you go to all pages, you get to A on the first page of special all pages. You get to ART, template article form.
Yeah. So there's at least, how many is that? 100 or 250 or something?
I think
templates
it's 200. It might be 300 actually.
Okay, there's a little.
There's a lot.
Maybe 200 just starting with A.
Well, there's numbers before that.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So maybe roughly between 1,000 and 10,000 templates, I guess.
That's probably a bit closer to 1,000, but yeah. So modules also, so you get to T for modules if you look at the first page of special all pages.
Okay. So in the hundreds of modules.
Yeah. And again, there's some where it's like not necessarily unique code, but like settings modules for specifically for our brackets. Printing brackets is actually really difficult.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the name of this podcast.
Yeah.
If in case people are wondering about Lua and modules, all that, just as a brief explainer, there's an extension called Scribunto, which lets you write scripts within the wiki in a language called Lua, which you can then call from within templates or anywhere else, and it does text processing. Although in your case, it's also doing a lot of database querying.
Yeah, a lot of, I don't want to say like, I don't know, probably 70% of the code that I've written is cargo or relies on cargo.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's actually it's really cool to look at the way you've set things up on Leaguepedia. Actually, I really think the combination of Lua and cargo, and I guess you can add page forms in there, might as well, is a really strong formula, and I wouldn't be surprised if it gets used a lot more in the future.
Yeah, so I would actually also add widgets and gadgets to that.
Oh, okay.
There's, yeah. So like the banner along the top of the wiki, that's loaded every time with a parse query. So that's a gadget. And then I have a couple pages where I've done widgets where it'll filter results if you click boxes. And I also set up an email subscription based on your watch list that you can set up using a widget.
Oh, cool! Wow, man, yeah, okay, yeah. You've been doing a lot of JavaScript. Yeah, widgets and gadgets are two other extensions that also let you write scripts. Although for both of those, they're usually JavaScript based. So it's client side as opposed to server side. Just explaining for anyone who's wondering about all this stuff. So it's actually interesting that you mentioned Excel before, because when I look at the combination of Lua and cargo on your wiki and in other places, it reminds me of Visual Basic macros in Excel. If you know about those, where cargo sort of functions like the data in spreadsheets, and then the Lua modules are sort of like the macros where you can do whatever custom thing needs to be done.
Yeah, I did very, very little VBA, but that's actually a pretty good comparison, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, is there a light at the end of the tunnel for all this work you're doing, or does it seem like the work will never really be done?
So I have like this Trello board, and it has maybe 4 columns of like long-term projects, and then it has like a column of short-term things, and the short-term things like always has a pretty long list, but then there's also these like long-term columns. So I guess the light at the end of the tunnel is that I really like what I do, and so working on all of these long-term things is like something that I'm looking forward to. But I don't really see any point where I'm like, all right, I'm done with this wiki, time to do something else. I think there's always going to be something where it's like, all right, there's still this thing that I can improve, and I'm still like going back and writing code that. So I guess most of what I've done for the past year is redo code that was there before me, but I'm also starting to rewrite code that I wrote at the beginning of 2018, where I'm like, I didn't know what I was doing well enough yet. I have to redo this, and I'm sure that cycle will never, ever, ever end.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you won't, look back on the code that you're writing now with embarrassment. Hopefully you've reached some kind of, plateau, I would think.
So our off season runs from November to January, and so the season is just starting again now. And my project for this off season was to basically write an entire backend for tournament, match, and game results, to have a single input place for that, and then have it display on tournament pages with a bunch of different visualizations, all from that single consistent source.
Oh wow!
So we have data pages. We have a data namespace and data pages where you save data. So I've had to do a bunch of. That was a huge project with Cargo and Lua. And then I've also had to write a bunch of Python to convert our old data to the new data format. And that's a combination of manual work and Python because everything is somewhat different. So with the conclusion of this project, like hopefully this is good.
Yeah. One interesting thing, anyone who reads your Twitter feed will see that you often ask about ideal user interface things, like what would people prefer to see on the front page or anywhere else, and what's the best order for this data, that kind of thing. It's interesting. I guess you're sort of in uncharted territory as far as how best to display esports in statistics and information.
Yeah, so sometimes it's an awkward position for me because obviously I've been a part of the esports community for a really long time, but I'm also not really a typical fan, and I'm also not a typical analyst or a typical coach or a typical player. So, and I am extremely familiar with the wiki. So the question of what kind of data do you want to see? How are you going to use it? What context is it going to be used in? What's easy for you to find? What has lower discoverability? These are all things that I can have opinions on, but I haven't had personal practical use cases. So I'll generally say like, okay, well, there's 3 or 4 different ways I can do this thing. I know what I feel like coding and what I don't feel like coding. So let's narrow this down to a couple options, and then I'll just see whatever people want to see. Yeah.
And how has the feedback been helpful on that?
It varies. Sometimes it'll be like, I'll ask some question and I'll get 250 responses, and it's like 49-51, and I'm like, great. I guess I'm gonna flip a coin. And every now and then I'm like, oh, I should really just make a gadget to change that and let you change it in user setting, but I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole too far. So if people really complain, I'll show them how to modify their common CSS in their user space. So I guess you can have a user setting that way.
Yeah. As a developer, I tend to try to avoid user settings. It always people, 99% of people go with the default anyway, so,
Yeah.
I might as well not worry about it. Except when there are people with special, forget it. I'm just rambling. So that's really cool. I want to ask about Gamepedia as a whole. How many wikis are there altogether, and how many are specifically about esports? Do you know?
So I know that there's over 2,000 wikis. I don't know the exact number, especially because wikis are constantly being added. I think we have about 17 esports wikis. So definitely like a much smaller percentage in terms of total number of wikis. But the esports wikis tend to be more active because there's constantly new things. So a lot of games have regular patches. So it's not like a blanket statement. But overall, since there's new esports results and news every day, it's a much more dynamic thing.
Yeah. So some video games have both. They have a wiki, I guess, just about the mechanics of the game, that kind of thing, and then a separate wiki about the esports for that game. Yeah,
so the way it's worked out, there's actually not that many wikis that have both, but some of them definitely do. So Leaguepedia does actually have a game information section in addition to the esports section, but we primarily focus on the esports aspect of stuff.
Okay.
And mostly our game information is there just because people might be searching for it already, and so we might as well have it. And also because, so when I mentioned, we have player information and stuff, so we'll have a lot of qualitative information about a player, and then also tabs behind the page where you can see, like I was saying, their match history, statistics about how they've played. And without going too much in depth, every time you play a game of League of Legends, you control a unit called a champion. And there's a bunch of different...
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different...
Sorry, I keep seeing that word, but I didn't know what it meant. Yeah, okay.
Okay, yeah. So champion means player-controlled unit, basically. And in League of Legends, you only control one unit at a time. And there's a bunch of different champions in the game. So typically we like to look at not just a player's stats, but their stats when they're playing a specific champion. But in addition to that, we might want to look at champion statistics regardless of who is playing it. So we have a bunch of stats and stuff that's tied to game entities instead of tied to people. So it just makes sense to have some game information so that we can have a page to attach those stats to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure, yeah, it definitely makes sense to have a single wiki for both about the game and about the sports, the competitions of it. So it seems like about half the wikis on Gamepedia are using a setup sort of like Leaguepedia's with cargo and everything else. Does that sound about right?
It's way less than... So I guess the question is, do you do it by total number of edits, or do you do it by just, total number of wikis? But yeah, it's not going to be half that are actively using cargo, but most of the very large wikis do use cargo.
I see, okay. Yeah, I looked through some of the other esports wikis on Gamepedia. There's ones for various... now I can't even remember. A Rocket League and some others.
We have Call of Duty, Fortnite, PUBG, Artifact, Battlerite, Gears of War, Halo, NBA 2K, Paladins, Rocket League, Siege, Smite, and Vainglory. There's a list in the sidebar.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it looks a lot like a lot of them have a similar data structure to Leaguepedia in terms of table names and everything else. I'm guessing that's due to some kind of standardization effort. Is that true? And if so, are you involved in that effort?
So I basically do all of my development on Leaguepedia first. Every now and then there will be a specific feature that I have to develop for another wiki. For example, in League of Legends, everyone's playing on a PC, but in Smite, you might play on PC or Xbox or PS4. And so having support for what console is being played on wasn't something that I developed for the LoL wiki. And actually now we do support it on the LoL wiki, and it is hard-coded with a default value of PC everywhere. But just because I do want that standardization so that I can copy-paste code across wikis, I try and support everything, even if it's unused. So I would say the big difference is if the game is team versus single player. So if the game is just a 1v1 and you want everything to be tagged to a player, then there's a lot of changes that have to be made. Because the way that results work right now is that for a team page, we'll join, there's 2 tables, one with results and one with rosters, and we'll join those together to do the query. But if it's just a 1v1, then obviously you don't have to join the rosters table. So I guess that's probably the biggest difference is it a team game or not. But I do have a default loadout that has a bunch of cargo table declarations, a bunch of modules and stuff in it. So we try to standardize as much as possible because I want to be able to just develop for one wiki and then copy across wikis. For the actual day-to-day mechanics of it, I don't do too much syncing of code. Usually other people are able to figure that out, but sometimes I help out with that.
Yeah, okay. But Leaguepedia is sort of like the best practice case, and everything is at least in theory supposed to emulate that, copy that to some extent. Yeah,
so I'd say up to the extent that it makes sense for that title, right. We try to have everything copy Leaguepedia.
Oh, okay. Is there a corresponding one for what is it, one-on-one games?
I want to say probably most of it is copied from the Fortnite wiki with how the Fortnite wiki does. So Fortnite has both teams and 1v1s, and PUBG does as well. So the person who does most of the template copying primarily works on Fortnite, so he probably copies from his own wiki.
Yeah. So I guess this is a good time to ask, how has Mediawiki in general, with all this related software and everything, how has that been working out for you? And what kind of problems have you run into, if any?
Okay, well, so overall Mediawiki has been great. I guess that my favorite thing about Mediawiki is that it's so easy to foster a community. So instead of just being people who randomly put data into a CMS and it sucks, it's really nice to have, so we have like a community chat in Discord and stuff, that's like a chat program. And it's just so easy to come together and build a site that's stuff that you all care about. Yeah. And I guess the other thing that I guess is specifically relevant for me is that I really appreciate I don't want to say ease because it wasn't all easy, but the accessibility that I had learning how to code and actually doing things at the same time. Yeah. The fact that everything, all of the template code is just hosted there and you can see it and edit it, and obviously some stuff is going to be protected, but the fact that it's all there, and so anyone can just say, okay, well, I want to learn how to do this. I have no idea what I'm doing. Maybe I won't commit my changes yet, but I can still look at what's going on and figure stuff out and learn stuff. I love that about the software.
Yeah. Any negatives or I
guess with extremely large databases, I'm still not too confident on Cargo being able to handle my huge scoreboard data, which I still think is likely on our end. Or I guess I don't want to say likely. I have no idea. And it's also possible that I'll just do it and it'll be fine. But I'm still a bit apprehensive about moving the 350,000 row thing into Cargo.
It should be fine. We'll see. I guess we'll find out. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that should be fine. I mean, it's just unless you're doing a lot of joins. Well, anyway, you'll know quite a bit more about this than I do.
We'll find out. Yeah. Yeah. No, we do occasionally still have problems with duplicate rows, and we're still not sure what's going on with that. So that's my big thing about not wanting to move everything over.
I see. Okay. Okay.
Because so I guess right now, what I was saying that I did over our off season. Let me actually just check so I can get an actual number here. So currently, there's two tables that are meant to be joined together, and one of them has 28,000 rows. The other one has 14,000 right now, but that's because most stuff is not migrated to it yet. So there's a match table and a game table, and game is like per game stuff, and match is like results of series. So the game one obviously should be significantly bigger than the match one, but because most of our data isn't migrated into that yet, that one's only 14,000 rows yet. So so I'm guessing that will get to be about 50,000 pretty soon. And so I'm gonna leave that for a couple months and see if it's fine without any group buys in the queries, and if that seems to be fine without having too many dupes happening, then I will see about moving our scoreboard data.
All right, very good. I'm guessing most people didn't understand all of that, but I certainly did, and I hope it works out. So actually, you mentioned community. How many active editors are there for this wiki? I mean, or just active of course can mean different things, but
yeah. So
very roughly order of magnitude.
Probably about 10 to 20 people who edit, like, I don't want to say like daily, but close to daily. And then probably another 20 to 40 people who edit like relatively often. And then a lot of people will do like 1 or 2 edits here and there.
Yeah. Cool. Finally, this is something I've been wondering about. I'm not sure if there's a good title for everything that you do, which I guess includes data management, programming, interface design, probably a bunch of other things. Do you have some preferred term that describes everything you do, like maybe a digital archivist or something?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say like I have no idea, but I like digital archivist. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's probably a pretty good description. And actually, we have made like not mirrors, but we've backed up articles from content sites that go offline. So we pretty much will archive anything that we're able to get our hands on.
Okay, yeah, there you're literally archiving. Yeah. I think the kind of thing you're doing is something that more people will be doing in the future. So you sort of blazing a trail or laying the groundwork. Cool. I think that's all my questions. Thanks a lot, Megan. It was great talking to you and hearing all about the work you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
This has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, Megan Cutrofello of Gamepedia and Leaguepedia. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.